What's up, everyone? I'm here in my NFL Week 4 DraftKings picks. You can check the link in the description below if you want to see a Week 3 recap and lineup review that I did earlier in the week. So let's not waste any more time and go ahead and get to Week 4 picks. Alright, so our first stack on the week is Andy Dalton and AJ Green, and it should not come as a surprise. AJ Green played pretty well last week, and Andy Dalton actually looked like he should be in the NFL for once. So these two should be one of the more popular stacks on the week. I suspect that a lot of people are going to be looking at these two guys in cash games just because they're facing the Cleveland Browns. But if we dive into the numbers, we can definitely see that it still is a favorable matchup, even though Cleveland isn't as bad as the typical Cleveland Browns we're used to seeing, at least as of late in these past few seasons, but they're still not, up to par yet. So right now, Cleveland is allowing the third most points per drive in the NFL. They're 11th in yards per drive. So I mainly want to focus on AJ Green because he's a much better play than Andy Dalton is, I think. So first off, I just talked about Cleveland is 27th in DVOA against wide receiver ones. A lot of that has to do with Jamar Taylor. Jamar Taylor should be shadowing AJ Green unless we hear otherwise. And if that happens, then this is definitely going to be a guy I'm going to be all over. Mainly just because, I talked about it in week 1, I think it was, when I liked Antonio Brown. The only other player I'd ever seen Jamar Taylor shadow before this season was AJ Green for a handful of plays. And AJ Green absolutely shredded him for like I think it was just 3 plays. I'm pretty sure he had 3 receptions, like 80-something receiving yards and a touchdown in just, a few plays. So because of that, I think AJ Green is a great play this week. Neither of them are really priced unfairly. I think they're pretty appropriately priced for both of them. So you're not getting a steal here for any one of these guys. And as far as Andy Dalton goes for cash games, this looks like a week where I'm either going to go all the way to the top and get Tom Brady in cash, or I'm going to go like all the way to the bottom and get somebody like Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor is a guy who, although he doesn't have a lot of upside per se because he's not going to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, he does have a very high floor because he's going to get you rushing yards. He does have a rushing touchdown potential, of course, and I don't hate that this week because that would free up a lot of cash that you could just go bonkers at wide receiver or wherever else you want to go with that. So, I think the one concern that I have in this specific spot is game flow. If we see the Bengals get out, front early and we see the Browns offense not be able to effectively move the ball, we could see the Bengals not pass it anymore. The Browns have not been very good in rushing defense either. So definitely a little bit of concern there for me, but we'll have to see what happens. So, these are two guys who definitely should be on your radar. All right, so next up, I have Carson Palmer and Larry Fitzgerald, and this is another stack that I expect to be pretty popular. A couple weeks ago, I think it was in week 2, maybe week 1, I said that Carson Palmer is washed, and I still feel that way, but honestly, the dude gets resurrected for like a drive or two, looks like another serviceable quarterback in the NFL, and then, he goes back to his old ways the very next drive. So it's really hard to say, either he's on the path to correcting that, or we're seeing signs of how bad he's going to be later in the season. So it's hard to say right now. But like I said, I haven't even talked about it yet. These videos on Wednesday and Friday are always dedicated towards the main slate. And this week, DraftKings, for some reason, has really narrowed down the slate even more. So first off, we're not going to get the Sunday night game with the Seahawks and Colts, I think it is. And for whatever reason, I don't know why DraftKings did that. And of course, we're not going to get the London game, which actually has the highest total game on the slate right now in Miami and New Orleans, which sucks. So, and we're also not going to get Aaron Rodgers because he's playing on Thursday night, and I can't even remember who's playing on Monday night, but I know we're missing out on some players there as well. So really thin slate here for once on the Sunday main slate. So if you wanted to play the full entire Thursday to Monday slate, I recommend you do that actually this week. And if you are going to play the full slate, these picks probably will be a little less relevant because you open up the entire field, of course, and you have a lot more options. Anyway, going back to Fitzgerald and Palmer here, the San Francisco defense has just not been very good. Just like the Browns, that are allowing a ton of points per drive. Right now, they're second worst in the NFL. They're bottom 10 in yards allowed per drive. One area that Palmer actually has looked okay is when he's not being heavily pressured, he actually doesn't look that bad. And that's one thing that this San Francisco defense is not good at. Right now, they're 31st in the NFL in hurries per game. They're 31st in sacks per game. So they're just not getting a lot of pressure on the quarterback, and it shows. They have one of the lowest turnover percentages in the NFL. In fact, they're the lowest turnover percentage in the NFL right now. Their sack percentage is very low as well. Their interception percentage is very low. So, you know, this San Francisco defense is just not very good. The San Francisco defense is not good against the rush either, but with Kerwin Williams and Andre Ellington and Chris Johnson, we really haven't seen a stable workhorse back yet out of them. So without David Johnson, I really don't think they're going to be able to move the ball too successfully. But, you know, we obviously, against San Francisco defense, nothing would surprise me. So I definitely think this is a spot to pick on this awful San Francisco defense. And doing it through the air with Palmer and Fitzgerald is definitely a good play. All right, so for my final stack here, I have Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins. And honestly, I like both of these a lot. Okay, so first off, the Tennessee Titans have actually been pretty average. Actually, they're a little bit below average in the passing defense, according to DVOA. But one thing they're actually not too bad at is against #1 wide receivers. They're actually 6th best in the NFL. That said, it's one of those situations where DeAndre Hopkins is just going to get forced targets. Now, last week, one interesting thing that did pop up last week was that Bruce Ellington actually emerged a little bit. Now, I'm not going to overhype Deshaun Watson because of what he did against the Patriots. I mean, we've seen so far the Patriots have been one of the worst defenses in the NFL up to this point, in my opinion. So if you wanted to be a little bit different here, though, one thing that you could do is, once again, this is a team that can do is a little bit better against wide receiver #1s, but still struggles with wide receiver 2s. The problem here with the Texans is they don't have a clear-cut wide receiver 2. Now, if Will Fuller magically is able to play this week, which I doubt he is. All right, so I just want to cut myself off here really quickly. I just saw that it looks like Will Fuller actually is going to play. Looks like he probably will be limited, but it still is definitely going to help DeAndre Hopkins in this spot. And if Will Fuller does somehow play, I'm definitely going to play DeAndre, because then that may take a little bit off of him. So right now, you have to think that DeAndre Hopkins is actually going to be heavily covered. And even if he is, I don't think that Watson's going to be scared to throw him the ball. Lots of different things on the board here, but I definitely don't mind playing these two and GPP. And if you wanted to go that route in cash, I can't say that I blame you. I don't know if that's where I'm going to be going yet. I really want to see what their ownership's going to be like. But, and you know, one thing I haven't even talked about yet is Deshaun Watson's rushing upside. You know, specifically in the red zone. Now, right now, he hasn't run the ball once in the red zone, but so far, I'm looking here, there's only been 8 rushing attempts in the red zone for this team. 6 by Foreman and 2 by Miller. They have yet to score a rushing touchdown in the red zone, and I'm pretty sure like one of the only rushing touchdowns they've scored all season was when Deshaun Watson ran it out from like 60 or 70 something yards against the Bengals there in that Thursday night game. So I suspect that we could see Deshaun Watson get some red zone rushing attempts this week, which would be very interesting. So if he does get some of those, he's going to have a ton of value, especially at this price point. All right, so finally moving into some running backs here, and I have LeSean McCoy on the screen, but I really think that all 3 of the 8K plus running backs are in play for me this week. I just have yet to decide who I like the most. Obviously, we have McCoy, then we have Le'Veon Bell at 8,700, and then Ezekiel Elliott at 82. And I think they're all 3 in really good spots. I mean, we have McCoy facing off against the Falcons on the road. I've talked about it a ton so far this season already, and we're just in week 4 about how bad this Atlanta Falcons team is against the receiving running back. And right now, McCoy actually has the most receptions on the Bills. Then we have Le'Veon Bell, who probably is in the toughest spot out of any of these 3 running backs. He's on the road against Baltimore. According to DVOA, the Baltimore Ravens were actually a historic defense in the first 2 weeks. They had the best rating DVOA in the first 2 weeks has ever handed out. They obviously came down a little bit after getting spanked against the Jaguars in London, but that probably is an outlier. So, but that said, Le'Veon Bell is obviously going to have a breakout week anytime here. I don't want to miss out on that. Then we have Ezekiel Elliott, who I actually think is my favorite play here. He's the cheapest of the 3. He's at home against the Rams. He's got the highest game total. He's only projecting a little bit lower. And a good plus for Elliott that we've seen so far this season is he's had at least 4 targets in every single game so far this season. So obviously on DraftKings, that is a big plus. So I think I like Elliott the most. But honestly, all 3 of these guys are in play. And honestly, if you want to play 2 of the 3, I can't blame you. But there's a lot of good high-priced wide receivers, I think, so far this week, at least that I've seen. So honestly, it's a little bit tricky, but you know, there's definitely some good options out there. And honestly, we could see all 3 of these guys have great games. All right, so next up, I have Leonard Fournette, and he's not a guy that I've played since week 1 when he had his first 100-yard rushing game. Since then, Hasn't been super efficient, but he's had pretty good DraftKings days because he scored a rushing touchdown in every single game this season. He's had at least 3 targets in every single game this season with over 20 receiving yards, so that's promising as well. This New York Jets defense is just below average, right? They're not the worst in the league by any means, but they're just kind of below average across the board. So with that said, I think this could be a situation, especially because of the Jets' lack of ability to move the ball offensively majority of the time. This could be a spot where we see the Jacksonville defense really just show up and shut down this offense. You know, right now, Jacksonville has the 5th overall DVOA. They're number 1 against the pass, and they're pretty much top 15 in every other category except one, which I'm going to touch on here in a second. So I like Fournette. You know, him catching those couple of extra passes definitely help. Looks like the Jaguars are pretty much, you know, setting it in stone right now that they want him to get in the end zone every single week. He's had at least 20 touches in 2 or 3 games. In the only game he didn't get, 20 touches, he had 16, and that's when they got blown out in week 2 against the Tennessee Titans. So, Fournette's probably going to be a pretty popular play with good reason. I don't mind him this week, and definitely an interesting option for your your running back too. Slot this week. Now that said, let's talk about the running back on the other side of the ball, because another guy who I think is going to be pretty popular, especially if Matt Forte cannot play, and that's going to be Bilal Powell. So I just talked about how good this Jacksonville defense is. Well, they're good in every aspect except one, and that's stopping the run. They're 32nd in DVOA right now against the run. They're dead last. So this is the only susceptible place they have on defense right now. And honestly, I think it's a little bit fluky, to be perfectly honest with you, especially as good as Jacksonville's secondary is. This could be a spot where we see Bilal Powell just get a lot of dump-offs from McCown because there's just nobody else open. That's really what I'm hoping for. One worry that I do have with Bilal Powell here is that he hasn't been involved in the passing game whatsoever since week 1. He had 2 targets in week 2, didn't catch any of them. He had 0 targets last week, but he had 15 rushing attempts and a rushing touchdown. So definitely had his most touches on the season last week against Miami, but honestly, I don't know. I think Bilal Powell is going to be a really good cash play if Matt Forte doesn't play, because he's just going to get those catches. I suspect if Forte doesn't go, I would be surprised, shocked, if Powell doesn't get at least 6 targets like he did in week 1. Because there's no other running back on this team that's going to get the passing down to work. He may lose a carry here and there to McGuire, I think his name is, but honestly, I really wouldn't be too worried about that. So honestly, Powell is definitely the receiving back on this team, so I suspect him to be utilized heavily if Forte cannot play. All right, so moving into wide receiver now, and I have Emmanuel Sanders on the screen, but I'll be honest, I've pretty much already talked about my 3 favorite wide receivers on the board so far this week, and AJ Green, Hopkins, and Fitzgerald, but I like Sanders a lot as well. So first off, I've always struggled picking between Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. I feel like their workloads are very similar. They're usually utilized in very similar situations. And, first off, their projection is almost identical, quite literally. They're 1/100th of a point off in projection right now. But there's 2 specific reasons I've picked Sanders over Thomas in this specific spot. Number 1 is Sanders is actually a little bit cheaper, only $200 cheaper, but still cheaper nevertheless. And the second one is a pretty big reason, and that Sanders is actually being utilized pretty heavily in the red zone compared to Demaryius Thomas. Demaryius Thomas only has 1 target in the red zone with 0 completions compared to Emmanuel Sanders, who right now has 5 targets, 3 completions, and 2 touchdowns. So, in fact, there's actually quite a few other pass catchers on this team right now for the Broncos that are being utilized more in the red zone than Demaryius Thomas. CJ Anderson has more red zone targets. Benny Fowler has more red zone targets. Even Virgil Green has more red zone targets than Demaryius Thomas right now. So it could be a fluke, but right now, so far, pretty much a month into the season, just about, it looks like this team prefers to look at other options aside from Demaryius Thomas. So that's why I have him a little bit lower on the board for me than Emmanuel Sanders. I don't hate stacking Trevor Siemian and Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas if you want to do that in a GPP or something. Even in cash games, Emmanuel Sanders is going to be in play for cash for me this week. I talked about it earlier in the season, and I caught a little bit of flack from it from a couple of you guys, thinking that this Raiders defense just isn't very good, and I think they got a little bit exposed last week on that Sunday night game against the Redskins. I think a lot of that had to do a little bit with how bad they played offensively as well. But, still, I think this is a good spot to play Sanders against this defense. And, I wouldn't be surprised if Thomas goes off. If you want to play Thomas over Sanders, I certainly can't blame you. But right now, I think Sanders is a much safer cash game play, and that's why I'm looking at him over Thomas. All right, so I get asked about sub 6K wide receivers quite a bit, so I figured we close out the position with a couple of those guys since I've already talked about quite a few expensive wideouts. So first up, I have Adam Thielen. So a line still has not come out for this game. I believe Vegas is still waiting to see if Case Keenum or Bradford is going to start. But either way, you have to assume that Stephon Diggs is going to see a lot of Darius Slay. And that should bode pretty well for Adam Thielen here, so that's why I like Thielen. Plus, he's quite a bit cheaper. To me, I've always seen Diggs as kind of like a boom or bust player, where he's either going to put up a massive fantasy day or he's going to do like little to nothing. And so far this season, we've pretty much seen him be nothing but boom. So I think that bust game is coming soon, especially if Keenum plays again here. Last week, he kind of exposed the Buccaneers without Brent Grimes, so definitely something to keep your eye on there. But I like Thielen. He's, like I said, quite a bit cheaper. I like him in the slot here, so Thielen is definitely a pretty good play. Another guy that I like is Marquise Lee. So I talked about him a couple weeks ago. I'm not super high on him, but he's been playing okay. He started out last week very, very well in London. Had like a 35-yard reception on like one of the first few plays of the game, and then right away the Jags got out to an early lead and were instantly trying to ice the game. With Leonard Fournette, excuse me. So it was it was not really surprising to me to see that he only had 7 targets for 4 receptions, which pretty much all came in the first half, I believe. So, not a big deal. But once again, Allen Robinson is out for the year. I think Marquise Lee is a very viable wide receiver 3 or maybe even a flex play in cash games this week. One concern that I do have is that Allen Hurns is getting more red zone work, and I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing Allen Hurns slightly more expensive. Allen Hurns is sitting at $4,700 compared to Marquise Lee's $4,500, and Hurns having 5 red zone targets, catching all 5 of them for 2 touchdowns is a little bit worrisome. So if you can get the extra $200, maybe go Hurns. I think Lee is definitely still a little bit more of the number 1 option there personally. I think Hurns is an interesting GPP play here, but maybe even playing Blake Bortles in one of these guys is an interesting GPP option if they can't, get out in front here and have to play from behind against the Jets. But honestly, I don't think I'm going to do that. I can't muster up Blake Bortles in my lineup anymore. I took way too many chances on him last season. So honestly, I don't mind Marquise Lee in cash. If you're going GPP, probably go Hurns, just because it looks like he has a little bit more touchdown upside. But, neither of them are really, high on my list of cash options. But if you have to go that route, they're certainly playable in my opinion. All right, so finishing up here with a couple of tight ends and in defense. And tight end is not a good-looking position this week. Like, there's a couple of okay plays, but they're super expensive. And then, like, if you get to the mid-range, there's a couple of guys I don't mind, but they're not being heavily utilized. So first up for me is Eric Ebron. This is a guy I talked about last week, and he completely let me down. But this week, he appears to be in a slightly better spot here against this Vikings defense. So right now, the Vikings are allowing 12.9 DK points per game to the tight end position. Doesn't sound awful, but it's actually 12th worst in the NFL right now. The Vikings are also 29th in DVOA against the tight end position. So that definitely helps Ebron here a little bit as well. So I don't know, man. I'm not even crazy about Ebron in this spot. The reason I have him on the screen right now is just because he's the cheapest guy I'm willing to play in cash games right now. I really want to play Hunter Henry, but he's not being utilized as much as I think he should be. I mean, this is a guy who would be a great tight end on most NFL teams right now, and be heavily utilized, and he just isn't at the moment. So until we see his usage go up, I don't think he's too safe of a play. Jared Cook is a little bit interesting. The one spot the Denver defense has been a little bit susceptible to is the tight end, but I'm not crazy about him either. He's already let me down a couple times this season, so I don't know, man. I like Delaney Walker. I don't know. Tell me, who is your favorite guy on the board right now? For me, I guess it's Ebron in cash. If I had to go for GPP, it'd probably be Zach Ertz, but he's so expensive that I just can't really justify playing him in cash games right now, and I think there's other options that, I could probably save. I could save that 3+ K and spend up elsewhere and think I could get more fantasy points out of it. So let me know who you like, but right now I think tight end is probably the toughest position on the slate right now for this main Sunday slate only. Okay, so moving to the defensive side of the ball now, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars down here, which I think is the pretty safe cash game play. But really, it really comes down to whether or not Matt Forte plays, because if we play Bilal Powell, do we really want to have that negative correlation with playing a Jets player and playing the team facing the Jets, right? So I don't know if we want to do that. But if you don't play Bilal Powell, it makes perfect sense, especially if you're going to play Leonard Fournette, to get that running back to defense correlation. I also don't mind the Buccaneers. The one thing about the Buccaneers is they're really banged up right now, and they got beaten and battered last week against that Vikings team, which is a little bit of a surprise. But honestly, because Brent Grimes didn't go, I think that had a lot to do with the fact that Stephon Diggs lit this team up. So if most of their players can play, I may take a chance on them, especially against this Giants team, which has been prone to turn the ball over, especially since it looks like a lot of people are going to be playing Odell Beckham this week. And if Brent Grimes does play, that definitely will help, kind of push down Odell Beckham's fantasy output a little bit. Not to say that he can't have a good game or a great game even still, but that should help a little bit. So don't mind the Buccaneers. I also don't mind the Ravens. Like, yes, they got lit up last week against the Jaguars, but I think that game was an outlier, very fluke-like. So this week, they're back in the States finally. I think they're at home against Pittsburgh. So they've been one of the highest rated DVOA defenses on the board, so I like that, but I'm not crazy about it. The only reason I really like them is they're cheap, but they're only $600 cheaper than the Jaguars. I don't really know, like, it's tough. Like, defense and tight end are two tough positions this week, and it may just come down to picking the cheapest guys you really are willing to play in your lineups. Usually I don't do that, but this week is kind of looking like that. Alright, so that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave it a like. As always, be sure to check out my sleeper/value picks video on Friday. Be sure to check out my Twitch and my Twitter link down below. I meant to do a live stream on Saturday last week and just never got to it. Some things came up, so hopefully I can get to that this week and we can do some kind of group lineup building and maybe toss it into like a free contest or something and see how it does. That would be pretty cool. So anyway, once again, hope you guys enjoyed, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Later.